I need to have Alex's position, so this way I can just wear my same outfit over and over and over again. No one will know.
Babe, you can just wear your same
I know. I got dressed up too. I didn't realize until I
Yes.
looked in the mirror before I left. I was like,
Yeah,
I wonder where
I
I
look
thought.
good.
I was like, I wonder where I thought I was going.
God, where do you want me to go today? I guess I'm. Dude,
Dana,
Palm
am I
Am I meeting
Springs.
future Mrs. Sanchez out
Yeah,
today?
dude, Palm Springs right now, it's like the place. It's bumping. There was at least 30 people in line at Starbucks.
What do they got going on over there right now?
I don't know. People like this weather. Can you believe that?
That's gross.
This weekend though, bro.
Was hot. Oh, yeah, 115.
We didn't even go outside yesterday.
I got in the car. It registered at 117.
I want to let you know that she had her eyeshadow matching her
did.
shirt.
Dang.
And then she had shoes that matched as well, but then she realized
Yeah.
that they were dirty. And
No, I realized that I didn't know if the neurologist was going to have to touch my feet. And I was like, if I put them in these shoes and I start sweating, they're going to be stinky and that'd be weird. So I wore my sandals.
yeah.
Okay, go.
Me, I just decided to put on a black shirt, a hat. Pfft, I'm done. Like, I'm out.
And me, I
5 minutes.
got dressed up for nothing. Literally got dressed up for nothing. I have
You know what?
no
it makes
idea
you
why.
feel good. It makes you
Yeah,
feel like
absolutely.
I've got it
I
together
didn't.
today.
I didn't realize until I went to the restroom that I looked at myself. I was like, "Where do you think you're going, bud?" I don't know. One of those days. But anyway, okay. So technically, this is episode 3
Yeah.
because unintentionally we're already on episode 3 because we the last recording we did was over 2 hours.
Yeah. We talked way too much.
No, that was such a great conversation.
a
So
lot
we
of
went ahead and
hours.
split that into 2. So this is technically episode 3. So I think with today's kind of what we were talking about as far as what we wanted to discuss was this idea of trials and tribulations. So I don't think you two could have gone on the journey that you guys did and not experience some of the most wild there's no other way to say this, booty clenching moments in the narrow door story where you're just like, oh my goodness, how are we going to do this? How is this going to get taken care of? How are we going to pay for this? What about this bill? Like, I can't even begin to imagine the type of stories that you have. But I think that would be great for people to hear these stories because here's what I discovered about suffering. I think with suffering, there's no such thing as comparative suffering because everybody, it's almost like pain, for instance. You know, pain is so subjective. People experience different types. They have different
Levels of pain.
yeah, pain thresholds, right? And I think that's the same with suffering. It's because when you start getting into comparative suffering, you lose empathy, right? Because you start going, well, they're not suffering like how I am. Therefore, their suffering is almost like it's disregarded. Like, who cares about what they're going through? Who cares about what they're experiencing? So you lose empathy when you compare suffering. So I don't think suffering is comparative, and that allows people to be able to build empathy because it's like, you know what suffering is. It sucks. So I don't know what level of suffering they're going through, but this might be the worst thing that they've ever experienced, and like to have empathy for that, right? And so I think in telling the narrow door stories and your guys' stories in this, and even my story to a certain degree, hopefully we can create an atmosphere for people who are listening to this episode that where they can just go, oh, I'm going through that. I'm thinking those things. Oh, you know what? Like, I thought I was wrong for having this thought about this, because here's another part of this that I don't think we really talk about a lot in Christianity. I don't feel Christianity handles suffering well. And I'm not talking necessarily people like dealing with suffering, but how we encourage people through suffering,
We
if
just
that makes sense.
Give them a Bible verse.
Yeah,
I
it's
know,
just
there's
like
so much more.
Yeah, and then like so when people go through these really dark moments through whatever trials and tribulations that they're going through, right? Whether it's the loss of a job, the loss of a loved one, mental issues, anxiety, divorce, whatever the case may be, I think there are a lot of people who feel like they're in sin. I think there's a lot of people who are going through extreme guilt and shame right now when they don't need to be.
Yeah, or people will just come off saying that like, hey, it's because of your faith that you're
Your
feeling this way.
lack
Your
of
lack of
faith.
faith,
Yeah.
Yep.
or you're not reading your Bible enough.
Yeah.
And then you're already feeling bad, and then people are like, "Oh, this. Oh, okay."
Yeah. Well,
So-
and like doing ministry for 13 years of doing pastoral ministry, like I've sat in a few counseling sessions where people are going, "Oh, I'm struggling with anxiety." Well, let me hit you with this verse from Philippians chapter 3, and it's like, okay, like, yes, that's true. But, people, and that granted, I'm like really microscoping right now, but just as an example, people that have anxiety, it's like, oh, you're not practicing enough faith. You need to pray more. You need to do A, B, and C. But we disregard the fact that this person might have clinical anxiety, like something is actually broken in their brain. But we tell them, instead of, hey, you should go see a doctor, you should go through some actual therapy, not just pastoral counseling, therapy, like go to a license of someone who's good at what they're doing, go to therapy, right? And we disregard all of that just to say, hey, you don't have enough faith. So not only is this person dealing with extreme anxiety, but now they're dealing with shame because they don't feel like they have enough faith. And that's why their anxiety is either getting worse or increasing, whatever the case may be. But all that to say, I think this would be a sweet conversation. And like I said, just hearing your guys' stories, both personally, together, through the narrow door, outside of the narrow door, your guys' personal lives. And then granted, like I said, I'll share as well. But again, I think it would be cool for people to hear these stories because they can go, okay, like I'm not alone. It's okay to feel this way, things of that nature. So where do y'all want to pick up?
You hit it up.
This is kind of like sad
This is a good
story
one for
time.
you.
No, that's hard because suffering. I think suffering it's so deep. It feels so heavy. Like, so when I was trying to think of a time when I last suffered, it was in my youth. I was like, okay, since I've moved here and been with the narrow door and really been able to grow into the adult I am, I haven't really suffered. Oh, but we've had trials, right? We've had heartache. We've had questions and worries, but I feel like most of my suffering was done in my youth, and it's nothing like I could have that I had control over. But later on in my adulthood, I had to process it. So when I was like, okay, I have anxiety, speaking of anxiety, like when you have anxiety, I have anxiety because of this. Yeah. That wasn't my fault. It was someone else or someone else's sin that caused me to live in that, have that life or that childhood I did.
Like situational.
Yeah. But I think that's why there's so many different levels of suffering, because you have people who have a beautiful childhood, right? And then they have one minor inconvenience that I would see as like, this isn't a big deal as an adult, and they are freaking out. Like, how do I handle it? Where for me, it's the opposite. I'm like, my childhood was rough and the instability was hard. And so now that I'm an adult, I can handle things that most adults can't because I'm like, it's okay. I've seen how God brought me through all of those things in my youth and brought me to where I am. Someone described it one time as like a claw machine. Like I was picked up from where I was and brought over here, and I've just been able to like flourish. Like God just literally went like, you don't belong here, you belong over here. And this is where
sometimes it is better just to get away from what there is to see everything around you, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but that doesn't mean we don't have trials and heartache right now. It's just how do we handle it now? And I think, it's so easy to say, well, here's a Bible verse or pray. I remember when Dave and I first got married, I was so overwhelmed with being in a new city, having babies back to back, and I missed my family. I had so much going on, and the babies were sick. Like Lila was sick, and I just remember being in the car, and I'm like so upset. And Dave's like, let's pray. I said, I don't want to pray. Like, leave me alone. Let me have my feelings right now. Let me be able to process this. But I can tell you years later, like after that moment, the first thing we do now is I understand why we pray. Because in that moment, I thought I could fix it. I was like, no, I have to do this. And I put all of that on me instead of being like, I should just pray and realize that I love my kid. I want the best for her, but Jesus loves her more than I do. He wants what's best for her. And so all that to say that, like, yeah, prayer definitely helps right now.
Before we bounce off of that real quick, Kara, if you don't mind me, like, obviously you don't have to go into details, but
I'm an open book.
Okay, so here we go.
I just know how deep you want me to go because also trauma brain, like I will just unleash it all.
Right.
We're going like where you're from, deep south. We're gonna get it out
because prayer, like obviously that this is kind of
it's not easy
in
to
suffering. Communicating prayer or to tell somebody, oh, you just got to be praying. Like, okay, yes, 100%. And we're going to get right back to that. But I would also say, like, someone that's going through like a tough situation, that's going through it, don't just come off, guns blazing, like, you need to be praying more. Like, there's this thing called empathy, right? And what is empathy? Is this ability to feel what they are feeling,
Yeah.
to literally
And
put
to see
yourself
it
in their
from
shoes,
their-
right?
Yeah, see it from their
And that's intercessing. Like, that's a huge thing that I don't hear a lot of preachers and pastors, and I don't hear a lot of people talking about this idea of intercessing. Actually, in this, the best picture I've ever had of intercessing was this idea of you're stepping into the gutter with them. You're like, I'm probably going to get dirty, probably going to get filthy, but you know what? I'm doing it because I love them, right? It's that ability to get down to the gutter with them. And so I would suggest, like, if you're just, if someone's in a hard moment, someone's going through a hard time, don't just hit them off the bat with, you need to be praying more. Pray for them.
Yeah, and I think
them.
in that moment, if Dave had just like wrapped his arm around me and started praying, I would have been able to. But he was like, "Let's pray," and I was like, "No, I'm not doing nothing.
Yeah,
Like I'm mad, I'm angry, I'm frustrated,
Absolutely.
I'm tired. Like I don't want to pray. But if you want to wrap your arm around me and pray for me right then that gives me a chance to kind of just
Because everybody deals with things completely different. My first thing
100%.
is I'm going to pray, like at this moment, no matter how I am. But it took me a long time to get there. Now I know, like, Kara needs to process it in those ways. So sometimes I just let her go, sit in her feelings for a little bit, and then we come back, and then we do. We just had a situation the other day where we stopped in the middle of the hall, and we just started praying. There was...
because there's
Just
nothing
like,
else you can
there's
do.
nothing
It's like
else you can
we had
do.
thought about it, like, okay, this is happening, like it's financially. So this is happening financially. Have we done everything we could do up to this point to make sure that our finances were secure? And we were like, yes. There's nothing more we could have done. There's nothing less we could. So what can we do? Well, then we can just pray and be like, okay, we've done it all. Like, what do you want? And how can you provide? Because you're the only one at this moment. We're not selling anything. It's not like we can up our business, but like, that was it. So in that moment, all we could do was pray.
And even those things, like when you realize, and we've talked about it going back and forth, when you realize that you're not the provider for your family. You've never been the provider for your family. It's always been Jesus. And when you start thinking about it that way, you start feeling more comfortable. Okay, well, I can't do anything about this. I'm doing
Or you've done all you can.
I've done all I can. So I'm just going to keep going in that direction and just watch God do, or just see him and listen to him where he wants you to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I loved what you said too, Kara, because I think a lot of people, you got to feel what you're feeling. If you're angry, if you're upset, if you're exhausted, if you're just emotionally just broken, whatever the case may be, like, feel those things. Like, it is okay to feel those things. I wish that was something someone had communicated to me, like, as, I was going through some of the stuff that I was going through, was like, hey, it is okay to be angry. Hey, it is okay to, because you carry with all those emotions, all this shame, because you're going like, oh, I'm all these things. I'm a horrible human being. I'm a sinner. You fill in the blank, like, but it's okay to feel those things, and whatever the things that you're dealing with, whatever situation you're going through, it's okay to feel those things. I think the key is to not stay there.
Yeah.
And I think to not stay there, you got to get into prayer, right? Like, and this is where, to get back to this idea of prayer again and why it's so important, Kara, like how, and this brings it back to the question. Sorry, this is a long roundabout way to ask this question, but what did your prayers look like?
In the beginning?
Yeah. Well, just in these moments of like, hey, I got nothing left, God. Like, here I'm at the end of my rope. Like, what do those prayers look like for you?
It's literally like just surrendering, especially when so the two things that really I get tested on a lot, because I know they're my weak spots, are my family and my finances. So when it came to our family part, like if my kids get sick or if there's something going on, like I want to know that they're okay because they're my responsibility, right? So family finances, but I had to completely like envision me carrying my kids to Jesus and then just laying them down, because I'm like, I can't do anything. I'm doing the best I can. So anything that comes along, they're here, they're at your feet. So it was really just my prayer of just surrendering every time. I'm like, I have to remember they're yours. Like, I'm doing the best I can, and I'm encouraging them and loving them and giving them my all, but at the same time, they're yours. So I think in those moments when it is just so tough, and in the beginning, like, I really wasn't sure how to pray. Like, I can express my wants, but I wasn't sure. But I think now it's just completely this is yours.
Yeah.
Our finances are yours. Not what I want for them. I have great big dreams for my kids, right? I have like, and I try to brainwash them into thinking they should do these things. Like plant little seeds, but at the same time.
That's a better
yeah,
term.
okay, yeah. I plant seeds, but at the same time, I know that might not be who they are. Yeah. They might decide something completely different. I'm okay with that because I have surrendered them to Jesus and whatever his will is for them. But back to the feeling your feelings, I had this thing probably like a year ago where I really wanted to learn more about Christ, right? Like I was like the characteristics of Christ I need to know, because I feel like when you're little and you learn about Jesus, like you see that picture where it's like that bright light and he's ascending and it's just beautiful. And so you think he just walked around like just, and
healed.
Yeah. And he just had this bright light and he was just I guess always in a good mood, peaceful even, And when I was reading, I was like, hold on, he felt all these things. Like he felt frustration. He did weep when the loss of his friend. He felt all these things that we feel. So then I should be allowed to just examine my own feelings and own them and be like, okay, I'm feeling this way. How do I move on? You're right, not sitting in it, because when you are there for too long, then it becomes unhealthy. If I'm angry for too long, it affects everyone around me. If I'm sad for too long, but acknowledging how I feel so that I can express it to my husband or to my family or to my friends, then we can move forward.
So what's crazy is just hearing where Kara's at now, because now I've known you for a few years, I guess.
A little bit.
But when I first met her, she literally would, if she's feeling a certain way or she's feeling anxious and she's upset or something was mad, she would be like, have to cut off everything. I'm cutting off everything around me and I'm just going to focus on this. Yeah. Or she would be like, I'm going to go sleep, because when I sleep, it's going to be better. And then she never deals with it. So then she would come to these moments where she's like, I want to cry, but now I don't know how to have
cry.
These emotions. I don't know how these.
I would like compartmentalize it, I guess. I would just suppress it so much that when I did cry, like it was like my whole body was having a physical reaction to just a little bit of sorrow. It was like it didn't know how to cry. It was just like a lot. And I was like, I don't want to exaggerate this, but at the same time, I've got hives. My throat's closing up. Like, I don't know how to do this. So yeah, I've been teaching myself over the last year or two of just how to cry, like how to be sad in this moment, and it's okay. And I can feel this way, but I'm going to move on, instead of just like, oh, I'm not going to feel that. I'm just going to tuck that away, But it's been good. It's been a journey.
Mm-hmm. And as I'm hearing you, Kara, like through this, because I love that you brought up the humanity of Jesus for this, because that is such a forgotten part about who Jesus was. Yes, was Jesus the Son of God? 100%. Was he absolutely perfect? 100%. But he was also a human being that experienced every single thing that you and I have ever experienced. And suffered. Dare I say,
suffered before the cross. Like he had trials 100%. And sufferings before he even got on that cross. 100%. So we're allowed to have that too.
He had friends that denied him. I mean,
I think the greatest example of Jesus' humanity is actually in the garden, right? You have Jesus in the garden. Because he's fully God, knows exactly what's coming. He understands, already knows what the pain is going to be. He knows every single detail of what is about to take place. And yet he still allows himself to be human. Well, how do we know this? Because he even begs his own father, if there's any other way, let this cup pass.
Yep.
So don't you think that means he was a little anxious?
100%.
So he was feeling some anxiety. Yeah. So when people say like, oh, you're not in your, like even Jesus, like he knew God completely. He knew what the plan was, and he was still anxious for this plan. So we're allowed to feel that.
Oh, 100%. And I think there even too is he has a physical reaction to his anxiety. He literally starts sweating great drops of blood, which is a condition called hemotidrosis. Hemotidrosis happens, they found like evidence of it usually only happens on the battlefield, which makes perfect amount of sense. You have a soldier who's, in a foxhole being bombed. He might experience hemotidrosis, which is like the body is just so overwhelmed, so stressed out that literally the blood capillaries, the little blood cells begin bursting and then mixing with your sweat glands. And then you sweat blood, but it'll cause your face to be swollen and your skin to be swollen. It's radical thing because but that tells you how deep into Jesus's feelings, like, you know, how deep he was into his own feelings. Like, my body is reacting to this anxiety, to this fear that he has. And of course, we know what Jesus's words were, but nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. And we pray that we can, obviously, we're not perfect like Jesus, and we'll, you know, we can, because that's not how it always looks.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like, not your will. Like,
No,
get me out of this
I'm
right
alright.
now, God.
I'm gonna go head out.
Yep. Like, I'm not doing this. I'm done, you know, but I love what you said, Kara, because one, you got to allow yourself to break. You got to allow it, right? Like, you can't just hold on to these things. You can't just pretend to be okay. You can't just show up to church and, you know, when you go through that Sunday, you know, hustle where it's like, hey, you know, you walk through the doors and say, hey, brother, hey, sister, how are you? Oh, I'm blessed and highly favored of the Lord. And it's like, how's your marriage? And you're like, oh, it's so good. But, you know, no one saw that you and your husband had a cussing match in front of the kids out in the parking lot before you showed up. Like, we just put on the Christian smile. We say all the Christian things and we do yada, yada, yada. But the reality is like, if we were honest, like our lives are falling apart, or my marriage is going through it, my kids are out of control, you fill in the blank, right? We're not very honest about how we're feeling. And I think a lot of that is shame. And not just a shame of like, oh, I'm such a bad person because I'm experiencing things or I'm going through these things, but shame also with each other as brothers and sisters in Christ. Like, I don't want anybody to know that my marriage is falling apart. I don't want anybody to know my kids are going wild. Like, so there's a lot of shame that keeps us from being honest, but that's where it starts. We got to allow ourselves to break. We got to allow ourselves to get to that point of just being brutally honest about where we're at.
With your community, because if you can open up to those people that you trust, then they can come alongside you to get you through that. If it is your marriage, like we've had multiple couple friends come and be like, we're not going to make it. And so then if you're honest with me and Dave, we are there. We are your team. We are team whoever. We are just part of your family. But if we don't know, you know, if you are putting on a facade, then how can your community come and support you?
Absolutely.
Especially your, you know, church community, the ones who are supposed to be there with you through thick and thin and love you unconditionally. We can't do that if you're not honest. Yeah.
And right there, you don't have to be honest with everybody, but you got to be honest with somebody.
You don't have to be on Facebook, like Facebook, Instagram. We don't need to know. Like, you don't need those people's opinions, because those people's opinions, I mean, they're not worth their weight. Like, they're just words. But at least when you have those people who you know genuinely love you and want what's best for you and your family, then like, bring those people around. That's how you're going to get through as community. And that's how we've gotten through so many things, you know, within our own lives and in ministry. If you have that community, then
okay, I want to come back to this, but to finish the point.
Yeah, finish it.
You got to allow yourself to break, right?
Absolutely.
Being open, honest, not just with people, but with people that you trust, right? Your community, but being broken and honest before God. So you got to allow yourself to break, but you can't stay broken because brokenness produces bitterness, right? And if you stay broken, you're just going to be bitter. And that's just that bitterness just grow. They call it a root of bitterness for a reason, because those roots run deep, they run thick, and you'll be a miserable human being for the rest of your life.
And you're putting that on other people.
That's not hating fair. God, hating people, the whole nine, right? So you got to allow yourself to break, but you can't stay broken. Be honest with your prayers, right? It's okay to be honest with God. Like, look at David, right? Like, David is the perfect example of this. You look at Psalms. Psalms are some of the most honest prayers ever prayed. David's literally going, you hate me. You must really hate me. I'm surrounded by all my enemies, right? And then, like, he gets really crazy because sometimes he'll be like, God, kill them all. Like, right? Like, David was so brutally honest, but I love his prayers because they're honest. They're just 100% honest, like, to the point where he almost looks whiny. But he's not whiny. He's just honest with God. Like, this is what I'm experiencing. This is what I'm feeling. And like, dare I say, that's why David was called a man after God's own heart. Because I think despite David's failures, he understood the importance of being brutally honest with God when it came to his prayer life. But now back into this idea of community, Kara and Dave, please hit on this too. Like, that is such an important thing when you're going through trials and tribulations. I can speak for myself that I am a hermit when it comes to suffering. Like I I tell people all the time, I'm an emotional escape artist. Like I know how not to feel my feelings. Like I know how to dive them. I know how to duck them. Like I know how not to feel what I'm feeling. And just because I hate it, like I hate introspection. Like I don't like it. I don't like, and then having to be open and honest about how you're feeling with others. Like I don't care for it. But what can happen in that, again, like that's, you're going to leave so much room for undealt with brokenness. Absolutely. And so that turns into bitterness. And then you're like, all of a sudden, because you're, being a hermit, because you want to, disengage from people, because you want to disassociate, because you want to retrieve into yourself, like, you start saying things like, oh man, well, people suck. I hate people, man. I just don't like people. But it's like, you were the one who were isolating. That's totally me. I go through those moments of like, man, where's everybody at? It's like, bro, you haven't picked up your, like a single phone call in like the last like 2 weeks. You haven't texted anybody back. Like,
you did it.
Why weren't you there for me? Oh,
no one cares.
Right? Yep. Like
they're not trying hard enough. I need like 5 phone calls. Yeah. Okay, that's what I need.
If it was the 6th, I would have answered.
Yeah.
And I know for a fact, like I'm not the only one who does this. Like I know for a fact I'm not the only one. I'm really bad at it, and it's shameful to even say this live, but it's true. Like I'm the person that I will retreat. I don't like being in community during suffering. When things are going great, it's cool. But because let's be honest, like when things are going great, I don't have to be honest with people. I don't have to be open with people. I don't have to be, in that intimate relationship with people.
But isn't that how sometimes prayer life is?
Oh,
like
100%.
you only come to Christ when you're hurting.
Yep.
So you're not shouting out his praises, but we need to be that way all the time. We need to come to him when the little things happen, the big things happen, when we're suffering, when we're going through those moments. One of the things I told, I tell my kids all the time, and me and Kara talk about it, is a God bullet. If he shoots a bullet, he's going to get to you. You might put up a wall, you might put up friends, you might put up all that stuff, but he's going to get through all of that until he gets through. You have to face those moments.
Yeah.
And one of the things that my pops always did, he goes, hey, it's better right now. Let's just get it done. Let's go right after. I remember getting in trouble. I did some bad things growing up, lots of stuff. But I remember one time getting in trouble with the sheriff's department, and my dad says, hey, let's go face it. Let's write a letter. Let's go talk to the people that we need to. Let's go right in front of the judge. We're going to just get it over right now. I'm like, what? But it's those moments that make you, head charge right into those things. It's putting that prayer up first and say, okay, Lord, I'm ready to hit it. Yeah. So those God bullets, they hurt.
100%.
But brokenness is beautiful because that's the time that God's going to do some amazing things if you let him.
100%.
And we always talk about, being melded like gold, and the purification for gold is so tough. Hitting it with the hammer, constantly turning, melding it. And once it's a block, then you're still doing it. It's over and over, the dross of it. And when it's purified, it's going to be beautiful. And I'm praying, I want it to be done right now because sometimes it hurts. But I pray that even till the end, I'm going to continue to hear God. I'm going to continue to be molded into the man that I'm supposed to be. And, just bless those people around us as well so they can see that it's okay to, get bumps and bruises, and you're going to come back up.
And you bring up an interesting topic now because, obviously, here's the fun part of this conversation that I always enjoy, because obviously we go through heartache. Obviously we go through pain. Obviously we go through suffering, right? These are obvious things of the human condition. We go through suffering. We go through pain. We go through trials. We go through tribulation. Everybody does. No one is exempt from this experience. Everybody goes through it. Now, of course, there are degrees into which people experience this, but everybody suffers. So that opens up to this question of why? Like, why? If God is such a good God, and this is something that, when I was teaching, this was always the question. Like, if God is so good, why does he allow this thing called suffering? Why is it even a thing? If God is, I don't understand how God can be a good God and allow for suffering. And so this has always been my question. And this is what, to bring it back to this idea that, because I love that analogy of gold. To better explain how this works, though, so why would God allow suffering? Well, see, God, from a theological perspective, God is sovereign, right? What does sovereign mean? The best way to understand what sovereignty is that nothing happens without God's will or permission. Meaning that nothing in this world happens without God's permission. So that leaves a very, very important question on the table once you understand what sovereignty is. Okay, so does God allow then for suffering? Does God allow for evil? Does God allow for these things? And the answer to that question is what? Yes. So how on earth can God be a good God if he allows for those things? Well, the answer to that question then becomes, well, God is only a bad God if God just allows suffering and evil to happen just for the sake of it. That's what would make God evil. That's what would make God bad. That's what would make God essentially not God. If pain and suffering and evil just happen for the sake of it. Unless, of course, there is a reason for it. This is where I feel like the pill gets hard to swallow. But you hit it right on the head, Dave, with this analogy of gold, right? Why would God allow for suffering? Well, there's got to be a reason for it. Well, what's the reason? Because it actually makes you better.
Amen.
It makes you better, which is such a crazy thing to understand, except for this analogy, gold, right? You already did this whole analogy with gold. How the process works, I absolutely love it. Or actually, I came up with it. I developed a different analogy, Dave. You'll like this one. Okay, did you guys ever see the show Forge and Fire?
Yep.
Okay, so
Is that the glass blowing show?
no, it's the ones where they make knives.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't. I think I didn't watch that.
It's on the History Show. If the boys haven't seen it, they would love this show.
Okay. Oh gosh.
So they literally, it's about these bladesmiths that come on and make these knives, and they literally make it from all kinds of different scrap pieces of metal, right? But usually, how the formula goes is they take a billet of metal. A billet is literally just you imagine
Solid
like a
piece.
brick of metal, right? And it's just this ugly piece of metal. Like I said, it's literally like a brick. It's got no use. It's got no function. The only way what's crazy about the show is they take these knives and they bend them into these beautiful shapes and these designs, and then they put these handles and these grips on them. They make works of art out of these knives. But the only way you get from that ugly piece of useless billet to this beautiful, ornate tool piece of art is by putting it in the most extreme amounts of heat, by beating it, by grinding it, and repeating this process over and over and over again. But it's the most violent process because it's grinding and heat and metal and sparks and it's so crazy. But then I go, that's us.
Yeah.
That's us. We are those billets. Those pieces of steel, and God has this design for us, for each and every single one of us, for our lives, for Dave's life, for Kara's life, for your kids' life, for my children's life, for everybody listening. He has a design for your life. But the only way, and this is the key, the only way to get from this useless billet into something beautiful or ornate is you gotta go through that process of being grinded, beat, put into the fire, and that's trials and that's suffering. It sucks, right? Like it does. Like it sucks. It's not fun. This is where I wish pastors and preachers and just Christians were more honest about this. It's not fun.
Yep.
This is the part of Christianity we don't like to talk about, but this is a reality of it. Like it's not fun. There's a reason why Jesus says, right? Count the cost. If you're going to follow me, it's going to cost you everything. Understand, it's going to cost you everything, but it's worth it. So I think what the cool thing there is, and to take away from that, Dave, is this idea of like suffering is not useless, only if you allow it to be.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I was about to say, if you don't follow through,
Yep.
then definitely it's pointless. But if you can grow through it, then that's perfect. That's exactly what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to be better afterwards. But it does suck.
Yeah.
Because then you go through those moments when something does hit and you're like, oh, I know the end result of this.
Yeah, and I think that's that's where that's where we've gotten to now, where it's like those things that really hurt bad in the beginning. We know that there's going to be something beautiful from it in the end if we can just get through it.
Yep.
You know, we're not as shocked or like, oh man, or as frustrated or disappointed. It's kind of like, okay, well, we're just going to keep going, and we know it's going to work out. And
This is not a death or anything like that. But again, Kara says one of the things that always hurts us, it's one of them's our kids, and getting like a diagnosis or getting something that's going on. Well, Waylon, we have 5 kids. Waylon, excuse me. When he was, how old was he when he got diagnosed?
4. He was almost 5.
So at 4 years old, we're having some problems with him. We didn't know how to control some of his behaviors or help him through some moments. He couldn't make friends. When he would talk to them, he would make just sounds like beep, 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 things like that. It was
Star Wars sounds.
and we thought it was cute, but we thought that's the way he is. Or he had problems with keeping shoes on, socks on, clothes, things like that. And we were just like, oh, he's a little different, nothing much. And then when we put him in preschool and the teacher comes up and says, hey, we're having some behavioral issues with him. In fact, he jumped the gate at the school and he ran onto a highway.
Oh, dang.
And we're like, what? In fact, I'm speaking in front of a group of pastors out here, and I get a phone call or a text message, and it says, hey, you need to come pick up your child. He ran onto the highway, and I'm like, how did you let him out? Like, that doesn't make sense, but he jumped the wall. We go, we're trying to figure out what to do, and one of our friends says, hey, go take them to a child psychologist. And I'm like, oh, what do you mean? Like, it's my child. There's nothing wrong with him. No, you need to just go get him evaluated. So we prayed about it. We found someone, just so happened to be one of our friends. They came back and they gave us a diagnosis. They said, hey, your son has autism. In fact, he's low functioning. He's not going to be able to.
No, he was still high functioning.
I thought his thing said he was going to be low functioning at that time.
Mm-mm. No, he was high functioning. It was just like certain things, like his emotional state or whatever. He was like 2 years behind. So even though he was 4, he would behave like a 2-year-old. He would handle his emotions like a 2-year-old, which was really rough.
So we get this diagnosis. We're trying to walk through about, what are we going to do? We start thinking, when did this happen? We should have seen signs before. We start looking through photos. He's not looking at us. What do you mean? Like all this stuff. And finally, when we're just like, okay, Lord, it doesn't matter. We don't care about a diagnosis. We weren't
mad. It wasn't like we were mad at the diagnosis. It was, okay, what do we do? Like, how do we handle this? Okay, this is who he is. We don't care what it's called. We can call it Waylanism. I don't care. I just wanted to know how to make him better and how to help him function.
And then next thing you know, we're like, okay, we got to get someone in here to help us out. They told us we're going to need 4 to 5 days a week of someone being in your house for several hours a day. And we're like, what is going on?
So it was in-home ABA therapy.
Yep.
So behavioral therapists would come to our house.
Okay.
And so then you're nervous because you're like, oh man, I'm gonna open up my house. Like this person's going to judge my parenting. They're going to watch everything I do and everything we do. Like so nerve-wracking. And then we opened the door to the first behavioral therapist we had coming through, and we recognized her. And she was actually volunteered with the narrow door, but she knew us. Like she knew who we were as people. So like you're not going to get judged, like because they already know.
Yep.
But she has been so amazing. Like we spent 3 years with her as our ABA therapist, but that was just an answered prayer because we're like, God, bring us someone who is going to help our family.
Yeah.
And here's this lady who knew us, knew what we did, and has been so helpful. But
we could have sat in those moments of, our child has ASD. He's not going to be able to do much. We start reading up all the stuff. He's not going to be able to. The chance of him having a wife or finding love like that's going to be low. The chances of him getting through some of the schooling is going to be low. They told us when he went into regular public school, he needed to be in like 75% special needs, and now he's going through regular school and he's getting great scores. It's you start realizing that God has a plan for each and every one of those things. We could have taken it as in this was a bad thing, which sometimes it's not fun, but you see the answer. You let him, okay, Lord, I'm going to set him at your feet. He belongs to you.
And as his teacher, I can attest to the fact that kid's, it's fantastic. I love having him as a student. He does great in class.
But we are also from that, like, not just did he grow and did we get him the help, but we became so much better of parents. Like we got all the help we needed to make sure that we were, helping him, but then also using those tools for their other kids and their behaviors, yeah, it was super helpful. But
it's crazy just to see how God can step in and make those things. He's gone to camp by himself. It's just crazy.
Yeah. But with community, right? It
Yes.
wasn't just us thinking we could fix it. It was like, hey, how are we going to pray about it? But then too, when you talk about community, what about like when we're going through a depression? It's like we've each experienced depression on our own. But I've witnessed people come up behind you and just like swoop you up and get you out of that mood and out of that environment to help you heal.
Yeah.
And these people couldn't be there for you if you don't tell them.
I'm gonna slide something in there.
Okay.
Yes, people don't know what to do if you don't tell them. 100%. But I think there's also obvious signs of when people within your community are suffering. And I think sometimes we're waiting for the phone call for them to get permission. Sometimes you got to go bust their door down. Because here's the reality. People that are like really going through it, like really, like I'm talking, they're in the depths of suffering and all the fun stuff that brings, right? Because I was in this place as well where it's like, if you were to ask me, what do you need? I don't have an answer to that question. Yeah. I don't know what I need. Like, I have no freaking clue what I need right now. I'm so lost in my grief and in my thoughts and my emotions. I'm trying to survive, trying to take care of 3 boys. Like, I don't know what I need. And so sometimes, like, you just got to insert yourself. Like, you just got to be willing to go, you know what? I don't know what you need, but I'm coming over. Like, I'm knocking. Yeah. And if you just need me to sit there and shut up and just sit with you and cry with you and be angry with you, that's what I'm going to do. If you need to, like, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway, Dave. I apologize. But it's like, if you just need me to come over and just, I need to bring a beer and like, we just need to sit down and just decompress that way, then that's what we're going to do. Yep. Like, I'm going to be there for you. And sometimes being there doesn't mean like, you got to go with all the wisdom in the world to answer every single question and problem that person has. Like, there was a podcast with Shia LaBeouf. And he's with another actor by the name of Jonathan Bernthal. Like, despite what you may feel about Shia LaBeouf and, you know, his antics.
I just didn't even know that's how you said his name now. Yeah. I've been saying it wrong.
Shia LaBeouf.
Yep,
Shia LaBeouf.
I'm going to keep saying it like that because it's been like that my whole life.
Shia LaBeouf. But he was talking about this idea because of some of the choices he made. Like, he was kind of a pariah. Not kind of. Like, nobody was messing with him. And he talks about his wife, who currently... She would show up when he had nothing to offer. And he said, he spoke this line. I was like, man, he's like, don't underestimate the power of the ministry of presence. And I was like, dang, like that is so huge. Like, because in my moments, and I'm sure like with some of the stuff you were going through, like, I don't need you to say anything. I just need you to be here. Just be present with me. Like, just sit with me. Like, there's something so powerful about just sitting there. And we've had friends that like that we've had to do that with, that, you know, just going through hard times, making some bad decisions. It's like, hey, like, I'm not gonna come over, and it's not because I'm gonna sit here and beat you up and tell you how wrong you are and give you all the Bible verses. I just want to love on you, man. Like, just want to love on you. And if we're just gonna sit there and not say anything, then we'll just sit there and not say anything. That's what we're gonna do.
I've had to show up at people's houses, or I'll let them know, hey, if I don't hear from you, I'm gonna call your mom. And you're a grown adult, and I'm going to be calling.
Or I'm just coming over.
Or I'm just coming over.
If you don't answer my phone call.
Like you said, a beer. Mine is usually, I'm like, hey, I'm coming over with some Reese's Blasts, and I'm going to sit with you, and we'll just feel hurt together. But, you know, I'm pretty good about sitting in my own mess.
Yep.
And sometimes I'm like, okay, no, this is it. But I do need those people that'll come up, and they might not understand it, but just letting it out.
Yeah.
And like you said, that presence with them, and those are those moments that, you know, there's people going through it with you.
Yep.
And as much as I know that my Father in heaven's watching over me, to have those people here on earth that are like Christ, that can just love on you and just be like, hey, bud, just know I don't know the answers.
Yep.
But I'm gonna walk with you through it.